Political order is often explained through power, institutions, borders, law, economy, and ideology. But beneath many political orders there is something deeper. There is trauma. The trauma-territory law model, as TTL, is a PII framework for understanding how collective trauma can become embedded in political order. TTL asks a difficult question. What happens when a society organizes territory and law around unresolved collective trauma? This matters because political order is not only built from constitutions, treaties, borders, courts, and governments, it is also built from memory. From loss, from fear, from invasion, from humiliation, from displacement, from civil war, from occupation, from genocide, from imperial collapse, from historical betrayal, from the belief that survival itself requires permanent control. TTL proposes a sequence: trauma, territory, law. First, trauma creates a collective wound. A society experiences a rupture so severe that it cannot simply return to ordinary political life. The trauma may be historical, military, ethnic, religious, colonial, civilizational, or territorial. It may be remembered directly, or it may be transmitted through institutions, education, culture, monuments, stories, maps, security, doctrines, and national identity. Second, trauma attaches itself to territory. Land becomes more than land. A border becomes more than a border. A city becomes more than a city. A river, mountain, homeland, coastline, holy site, settlement, or lost province becomes the symbolic container of collective survival. Territory becomes the place where trauma is stabilized. It becomes the proof that the group still exists. It becomes the line that must not be crossed. It becomes the space that must be recovered, defended, purified, protected, or never surrendered. Third, law codifies the trauma-territory relation. Law does not merely regulate land. It turns memory into authority. It defines who belongs, who may return, who may settle, who may own, who may cross, who may govern, who may be protected, who may be excluded, who is recognized, who is erased. This is the TTL sequence. Trauma becomes territorial fixation. Territorial fixation becomes legal codification. Legal codification becomes political order. This does not mean every law is traumatic. It does not mean every territorial claim is irrational. And it does not mean every political order is illegitimate. TTL is not a slogan. It is a diagnostic model. It helps us see when political order is not simply organizing space, but stabilizing unresolved trauma through space. This is where TTL fits inside the wider PII political order model. PII already uses the institutional strain model, spoken as ISM, to diagnose when institutions remain formally intact but are internally stressed. A parliament may still sit, a court may still rule, a ministry may still operate, a treaty may still exist, but the institutional system may be under strain because legitimacy, capacity, public trust, legal constraint, and social reality no longer align. ISM asks, is the institution still able to carry the pressure placed upon it? PII also uses the order reconfiguration model, spoken as ORM, to analyze when the operating logic of political order begins to change. The old order may remain visible. States, alliances, treaties, borders, and institutions may still exist. But beneath the surface, the constraint field is shifted. A strike is no longer only a strike. A deployment is no longer only a deployment. A trade route is no longer only infrastructure. A media narrative is no longer only communication. A diplomatic meeting is no longer only diplomacy. ORM asks, has the system merely escalated, or has the order itself begun to reconfigure? TTL adds a deeper layer. It asks, what historical wound is the political order trying to stabilize? ISM studies institutional strain. ORM studies order reconfiguration. TTL studies the trauma architecture beneath territory and law. Together, these models give PII a layered model of political order. At the surface, we see events, elections, wars, court decisions, border disputes, security measures, treaty conflicts, protests, sanctions, diplomatic cries. Below the surface, ISM asks whether institutions are under strain. ORM asks whether the order is beginning to reconfigure. TTL asks whether unresolved collective trauma has become territorial and legal structure. This matters because many conflicts cannot be understood only by asking who controls the land, who has melody power, who has legal title, who signed the treaty, who has international recognition. Those questions matter.
But TTL adds another question. What trauma does this territory carry? A territory may be legally defined, but emotionally unresolved. A border may be internationally recognized, but historically contested. A law may be formally valid, but trauma-coded. A constitution may appear neutral, while preserving a memory of fear, loss, conquest, or exclusion. A security doctrine may present itself as rational defense, while also functioning as historical trauma management. TTL helps explain why some territorial conflicts become so resistant to ordinary negotiation, because the dispute is not only about land. It is about identity, memory, survival, dignity, historical injury, and the fear that concession will reopen the wound. In TTL terms, some political orders are not merely territorial orders. They are trauma-stabilization systems. This is why law becomes so important. Law can heal. Law can recognize harm. Law can create restitution, rights, citizenship, return, protection, and institutional repair. But law can also freeze trauma. It can preserve exclusion. It can convert fear into permanent emergency. It can turn historical injury into territorial absolutism. It can make a temporary security condition into a permanent legal order. It can make trauma govern the future. TTL therefore asks whether law is doing one of two things. Is law transforming trauma into justice? Or is law preserving trauma as political order? That distinction is crucial, because when trauma is not processed, it often seeks territory. And when trauma secures territory, it often seeks law. And when law codifies trauma, the political order may become extremely durable, but also extremely difficult to transform. This is the danger TTL identifies. A society may believe it is defending order, but it may actually be reproducing trauma through order. A state may believe it is securing territory, but it may be making territory carry the burden of unresolved history. An institution may believe it is applying law, but it may be enforcing a legal form that stabilizes an old wound rather than resolving it. TTL does not say that trauma can simply be removed from politics. That would be naive. Collective trauma is real. Territorial attachment is real. Legal order is necessary. But TTL says that political order becomes dangerous when trauma, territory, and law become fused without reflection, correction, or admissibility.
This is where PII's broader governance sequence becomes essential. Signal, constraint, ontology, admissibility, action. First, we must identify the signal. What trauma is present? What memory is active? What fear is being transmitted? What injury is still organizing political meaning? Second, we must identify the constraint. What legal, ethical, historical, territorial, human, institutional, and security constraints apply? Third, we must classify the issue correctly. Is this a border dispute, a constitutional problem, a recognition crisis, a memory conflict, a security dilemma, a sovereignty claim, a trauma-coded order? Fourth, we must ask what action is admissible. Not every historical wound justifies present coercion. Not every territorial claim justifies exclusion. Not every security fear justifies permanent emergency. Not every legal form is legitimate simply because it exists. Finally, action must follow only after the trauma, territory, and legal structure have been properly interpreted. TTL is therefore not only a model of conflict, it is also a model of restraint. It warns against acting too quickly when trauma has distorted political classification. It warns against treating law as neutral when law has become the carrier of unresolved historical fear. It warns against treating territory as empty space when territory has become the symbolic container of collective survival. And it warns against treating political order as stable simply because institutions still operate. The deeper order may be unstable, the trauma may still govern, the law may still encode it, the territory may still carry it. The political order model therefore needs TTL because political order is not only institutional, it is also mnemonic. It remembers, it protects, it excludes, it repeats, it codifies, it territorializes. TTL helps us see this hidden architecture. The institutional strain model, ISM, asks, can the institution still bear the pressure? The order reconfiguration model, ORM, asks, is the order beginning to change its operating logic? The trauma, territory, law model, TTL, asks, what unresolved trauma has become territory, and what territory has become law? Together, these models help PII analyze political order not as a static arrangement, but as a living structure of memory, constraint, legitimacy, and action. The core insight is this: political order is not only made by power, it is made by the way society stabilized trauma into territory and territory into law. When that sequence is understood, governance can become more careful, law can become more honest, territory can become less absolute, and political order can begin to distinguish survival from repetition, justice from fixation, and legitimate protection from trauma-coded domination. That is the purpose of the trauma, territory, law model. PII, a discipline, not a trend, a framework, not an opinion. Frameworks turn complexity into admissible decisions.